Hello everyone, I'm Andrew. This video forms part of a series on Agile software design, where I'll be discussing how design relates to Agile software development practices. In this video, I want to differentiate between several different types of design to clarify which of those types I'm covering, and then talk in detail about what design is. Design means different things to different people, depending perhaps on their background. If you were to search on the internet for design, software design, and particularly tools and techniques for software design, you might come across a different type of design which might be a bit confusing. One that's common to find details of is user interface design. User interface design has been a part of software development for a very long time, as you can imagine. And that's about how a software application looks. It's about styling it so that it looks attractive and that things are easy to identify within the layout. More recently, we've talked about user experience design more. That's recognizing the importance of how a user feels as they use the software, how they go through it, whether they find it easier to navigate, and whether they understand the processes behind the software. All of that is very important, and that forms part of a more recent trend of talking about user experience design. But there's a third part of design which might be considered more traditional, almost old-fashioned if you like, and that's technical or structural design, which is about how software is put together in the background. Structural design is what I'm going to be talking about in this series. So it's important that we step back, and this video covers what structural design is about. Well, really, apart from anything else, design is about thinking about how software is going to be built, thinking about the opportunities for building it in a way which means that it's easy to maintain in the future, easy to change, which is surely agile. Part of design is thinking about how to name things, but mainly it's about how to structure things so that parts of the software exist only once and can be reused. More than anything else, we could think of design as a plan. It's thinking about what we're going to build before we build it. Design is at a higher level than coding. It's about taking a step away from the code and the individual lines of code, consider the modularity of what we're building. It's also an opportunity to apply a few principles you might have heard of, like the solid principles and the dry principle, the don't repeat yourself principle. Solid is about how to build an application in such a way that it is easy to navigate and less likely to have bugs in. And dry is about making sure that we don't copy bits of code so that multiple places have to be changed in concert if a change comes about to the requirements. You might think that dry applies only to the coding level, and it's certainly true that it's when we're coding that we might spot that dry is more important than we thought. But if you think about it, if we're copying code, what it means is that we haven't identified at the design stage that something needs to be reusable. Design is also an opportunity to apply design patterns. And I'm not just talking about design patterns you might find in an official book like the Gang of Four's book on design patterns. Within your team, you might have identified ways of working, patterns, practices that suit you and that have helped you solve problems. And those can be considered patterns as well, maybe just not with capital letters. Consistent naming can be an important part of design. If we've chosen a naming standard that helps someone understand what something does, then reapplying that across different parts of the software will help make consistent our thinking process about what a piece of software or a part of that software is likely to be doing. There's one more thing which is an opportunity in design, which I want to talk about in a later video, and that's risk management. Risk management isn't officially a part of design, but it's actually a place where we can do it quite easily. Building software is risky, particularly web software, in the sense that we could introduce a vulnerability which might put our users or our company at some form of risk, or even ourselves as individuals. Taking the opportunity of doing a little bit of risk management at a design stage can help mitigate some of the risks that could appear later down the road. It's the ultimate form of shift left. You might think of what I've talked about so far sounding like architecture. So how does design relate to architecture? Well, the definition of architecture, to some extent, is that architecture is about making decisions that are costly to change at a later date. It's a system-wide and holistic view of how a system will be built, thinking about not only what is needed now, but what will be needed in the future, as far as we know. Architecture is at a very high level. It's a long way away from thinking about individual lines of code, and as such we could consider it a helicopter view. By definition, design, therefore, must be about less expensive decisions. It's about focusing on smaller areas, probably the areas that we're working on for an individual software task, or perhaps a couple of tasks. It's closer to the code, but it's still not at the code level. You might consider this a ladder view. If we look at this diagram, which tries to suggest abstraction by discipline, what you can see on the left is that coding is not very abstract. It's about solving the actual problem, each line at a time. Whilst we might be able to think about how parts of software should fit together whilst coding, it's not always easy to do that while thinking about every individual line. Architecture on the right hand side is quite abstract. It's not thinking about individual lines of code. It's thinking more at a structural level across the system about what the system needs to achieve and how we might achieve that. And design fits in between the two. It's not as low level as coding, and it's not as high level or as abstract as architecture, but there is some crossover. So in summary, design is about planning before we build. In the next episode, I want to talk in more detail about why we might do design, the benefits of carrying out design while working in an Agile team. I hope you'll join me for that episode.